Good afternoon. I will have a very different approach, and I would like to underline that colleagues in INVALSI work in very varied methodologies and ways. We are presenting today some preliminary exploration on the concept of learning-to-learn in connection with the concept of the value added by schools. As a study background, the value added by schools is a contribution to students' learning between at least 2 points in time. This is the definition of value added that our INVALSI colleagues have studied over time. And value added is net of other factors that are not under the control of the individual school for its intervention. Typically, such factors include general and individual social context and students' prior learning in the competencies measured by us, by the Institute, namely in national language and mathematics. Among key competencies, learning to learn has gained a central importance within the conceptualizations of the European Union, and we have been involved in this conceptualization since 2006, 2017. And this competence, intrinsically transversal, can be seen as an organizing concept around which several countries now structure their curricular guidelines, some examples being in Australia, New Zealand, and recently Mexico, with varying degrees of use of the concept in their curricular guidelines. In Italy, this competence has been initially introduced in national guidelines in 2007, and then more convincingly in 2012. In the curricular guidelines spanning from preschool to lower secondary education, but not actually in upper secondary education. This is an important aspect of our exploration. In Italian upper secondary education, in fact, there is a marked differentiation still between school subjects, and this could make it more difficult to translate the concept of learning to learn into actual school practices. The core question, thus, of this study is whether a qualitative, I underline qualitative, connection exists between value added by schools to students' learning and learning to learn as a competence that students could acquire in school, given that learning to learn should be one of the key outcomes of school attendance. This, to my knowledge, is one of its kind in Italy, this study, and it's the first exploration of the Institute on the value added by schools. Within the European framework for key competencies, learning to learn has a prominent position, and especially in the conceptualizations of the later European Commission. And this is a metaphor of the tree that the Commission is currently working on, and I'm a member of this group, to render the idea of what learning to learn is, which is a very complex concept that embraces, let's say, the personal qualities, social qualities, and learning how to learn aspects. And it's rooted in self-regulation and you see the roots. Well, this metaphor is actually trying to picture the complexity of the concept, and it might be questionable because all the metaphors are, but it's the current conceptualization in the EU. INVALSI's conceptual matrix for value added in Italy is the result of two dimensions, the school effect and the observed student scores in national testing in Italian and mathematics. We would like to understand more precisely schools with highly positive school effect and with student scores above national average. And at the same time, we would like to understand what's going on in schools with inadequate value added and with student scores to improve. So we frame this study within a broader project that INVALSI is carrying out currently. And the project is named Learning to Learn in Italy, Europe, and in Latin America. We have launched this study in 2018, and it's ongoing with colleagues from Brazil, Ecuador, Italy, Mexico, Spain, and Uruguay. And its aim is to understand teachers' representations of this competence and learning to learn concrete applications in everyday practice in all countries involved. The research method to investigate this in teachers is a qualitative interview for teachers, semi-structured in 9 themes and 20 questions. I'm not going into the details of the methodology. My colleague also, Ugo, is here and can go deeper into this, because we have a lot to say in terms of how we conceive the methodology. We have tried to be very careful in translating the interview and adapting it into local language and contexts, especially trying to guarantee semantic equivalence of the questions for teachers in the various contexts. And INVALSI carried out actions also to involve and train researchers in our partner researchers in several meetings with the idea to co-construct a profound comprehension of the interview dynamics and of the themes naturally to investigate. We have done so also by calibrating the interviewers. We have done this by joint analysis of pilot transcripts, which are not going to be presented here. So I am going to briefly give you an account of the point zero of our analysis, because we are really starting. So these are preliminary results. I want to underline this. In terms of sampling, we had the benefit of working with my colleague Andrea that just presented, because we, of course, we are talking about a qualitative project, but we have had criteria for the selection of the sample that were kind of strong criteria. We selected randomly the schools that we worked with from the Italian National School Database, and we selected schools with these characteristics. Schooling, of course, schools willing to participate, and we obtained local permits to access the school, of course. Geographical distribution of the schools in north, center, and south of Italy. Scholastic level, we wanted to interview teachers in preschool, primary, lower, and upper secondary education. The ages of teachers' children we carefully selected, because we wanted to represent teachers of children aged 5, 10, 13, 15-year-olds. And these are, of course, very selected ages for a number of reasons. High and low level of value added. Of course, this is one of the strongest criteria that we had in Italy. To student outcomes in the two primary school subjects, Italian and mathematics, and high or low socioeconomic status of schools in all countries except Italy. Preferably, we contacted public schools, and in Italy, preschools within selected comprehensive institutes were also included. teachers of national, local language and mathematics within the selected schools were interviewed, preferably with more than 5 years of teaching experience. This is the international sample that consisted of 142 interviewed teachers. My research question on this big work is just one very small portion of the project, but the hypothesis of the study was to understand whether there is something different in schools with high or low value added in Italian and math. And so we thought that complex learning to learn teacher definitions are encountered, that included in highly positive value added schools. My purpose today is to present you this very preliminary, very partial analysis still of the 40 definitions of the interviews in the Italian sample in the north, central and southern Italian schools. Particularly, I wanted to verify whether there are differences in conceptualizations of learning to learn in Italian teachers according to geographical area, value added by schools, positive versus negative, scholastic level and school subject taught by teachers. This study, of course, does not yet tap other differences which could be analyzed in the future, also in the participating countries. So we of course, concentrated our attention on these two sets of schools. The methodology, I have said randomly selected schools. All schools have been contacted with a formal letter signed by a president, with the privacy statements and etc. Participating schools represent 94.4% of the original sample. 17 schools out of 18 participated, and we obtained a low coverage, incredibly, only in the north negative stratum. And fieldwork has been conducted within April-May 2019, so we are quite fresh with our interviews, and every interview has been audio taped, anonymized and integrally transcribed with a set of transcription procedures for analysis with a couple of applications. Well, this is the actual Italian sample, quite balanced except in the north part of the pie, north negative value-added part of the pie. The method of analysis here presented is mixed. We imported all interviews, of course, with their variables in MaxQDA Analytics Pro. And we, of course, had to read integrally the responses containing learning to learn definitions. That was in question 17 with its prompts. And I have adopted first a top-down approach of automatic coding of definitions based on a list of components deriving from the literature, also from my own work, because I have worked a lot on this subject. And then I tried to adopt also the other approach, the bottom-up approach, in vivo coding emerging from interviews, talks. And I reorganized the codes per study variables, identified some metaphors that were coming from teachers in their definitions of learning to learn, and I tried to evaluate the definitions based on Hansel's learning to learn theory. He postulates that there are narrow and broad conceptualizations of learning to learn, and I follow that. narrow being primarily focused on study strategies and methods, while a broad definition involves many more elements and a deeper engagement with the material to be learned. Then I tried to distinguish these definitions and classified broad or narrow definitions based on a criterion of at least 3 different components. So here you see visually what the results are. A narrow definition is learning to learn is a continuous process. You never end to know something, and learning something on our own, on the external world, on disciplines. But I wouldn't know how to synthesize this. Yeah, this is an example of a narrow definition. And this is an extreme example of narrow definition. You never end up with your learning. You never end your learning fundamentally. This is an example of a narrow definition, whereas a broad definition is much more complex, and I cannot even read it because I cannot see it, but it includes a lot of other elements. Unfortunately, I cannot read, but you can probably read the red parts. This is quite different. I mean, generally speaking, when a teacher knows what learning to learn is, this course is very much more articulated. So these are preliminary quantitative codings with some methods, keywords of the concept, motivation, very few clear codings can be attached to these key elements of learning to learn. And these are the overall results in terms of our sample. We can see that basically there are a lot of red areas. Red areas mean that teachers have provided very narrow conceptualizations, and the green areas are those with a broader conceptualization. 75% of the definitions are narrow on the total of 40. So, and basically these come from the north and central Italy, and with positive added value, yeah? We only have one broad definition in a positive school in the south. So this has a lot to do, apparently, with, we have found something. Yeah, this is another way to put it. But broad definitions are quite scarce in the negative value-added schools. But not all the positive schools, this is something to underline, have a broad definition given by teachers. So although there are preliminary results of these codings, we think there is something here to go deeper into. Most of the positive definitions are found in the north, and negative value-added schools also are quite high in the south. Overall, our research shows that the percentage of the interviewed teachers do not hold a wide, broad learning-to-learn conception. Preliminary and partial analysis seem to yield mixed results. The tendency is to find broader definitions in schools with positive value added. Of the 10 broad definitions that I have encountered so far, only 2 are found in schools with negative value added, and 9 out of 10 broad definitions are found in schools of northern and central Italy. There are, and in these areas, 7 of 9 definitions are in schools with positive added value. Although our initial hypothesis seems confirmed, not all schools with positive value added have teachers with broad conceptualizations of learning to learn. Interestingly, broad definitions seem more common in preschools and in lower secondary school rather than in secondary school, upper secondary school. And this has to do probably also with the curricular orientation of upper secondary schools. Differences in the conceptualization of teachers within schools are also encountered and equally distributed between mathematics and Italian teachers. There doesn't seem to be a very big difference between the two subjects in this respect, with a slight prevalence of broad definitions coming from mathematics teachers. No true and proper school pattern could be, however, found. Yeah, I think that we run out of time, but I wanted to underline some provisional conclusions. This qualitative analysis seems to corroborate the hypothesis that positive value-added schools do something different for learning to learn compared to low value-added schools. However, this evidence is not, of course, conclusive for all positive value-added schools, as a true and purple school pattern could not be detected, and this could merit some exploration also from the quantitative side. Maybe there is a lack of school culture conducive to learning to learn. In all geographical areas except in the South, there seems to be teachers with individual interest in broad conceptualization, but varying teachings conceptions might impact, I think, learning to learn, or vice versa. They can be influenced by learning to learn. I think three major aspects to conclude merit attention. In Southern schools, there seems to be a blurred notion of learning to learn. Preschool seems promising in its learning to learn conceptualization, and upper secondary school might suffer from a curriculum that still is heavily reliant on subject matter knowledge rather than on competence-based approach. There are several study limitations. Of course, this is a preliminary thing. But I think this is worth further analysis, and further steps could be analysis to counter, other analysis to counter this study limitation, comparative analysis with other countries, cultural analysis that I couldn't do for the moment, and probably this could be something to look in the future of the Learning to Learn project. Thank you so very much. I leave you with a citation by Montessori, which is not the preoccupation of making kids learn things, but to maintain in them their light that is called intelligence. This is what we actually need to direct our cures to them. Thank you so much for your attention.